Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Tyler Prize Laureate Conversation, Nature, Our People, and Our Interwoven Future. My name is Shantae Davis, and I'm honored to be here today as a Tyler Prize Student Ambassador from Duke University. The Tyler Prize is the world's oldest and most prestigious environmental prize that honors the work of scientists around the globe. As a young person passionate about environmental justice, I've grown up in a world where the effects of biodiversity loss, climate change, and pollution are not future threats, but our present reality. But I've also seen how powerful young voices can be when we speak up and demand action. We understand that people and nature are deeply connected, and that by protecting one, we protect the other. Today's conversation is about that shared future and the choices we must make together. We're so grateful you've joined us for this important event. To officially kick things off, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Joe Alvai, Director of the Wrigley Institute for Environment and Sustainability and member of the Tyler Prize Executive Committee. Dr. Alvai is a globally recognized expert in environmental decision making and a passionate advocate for bringing science and society closer together. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Alvai.
It's still morning. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. It's a real pleasure to welcome you all to USC, those of you who are joining us for this Tyler Prize conversation today. It's really nice to see past laureates in the audience, old friends, and all of you who I recognize from my day-to-day activities here. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to celebrate Eduardo and Sandra, two real luminaries at the intersection of sustainability and society. Welcome to USC. We're so proud to be one of the homes, if not the academic home of the Tyler Prize. It means an awful lot to me as the director of the Wrigley Institute. I know it means a ton to our dean and the dean's office, and it goes all the way on up through our provost to our president. Being able to play host to this important prize, the Nobel Prize for the environment, is an honor, and it's a great responsibility, and we take both of those things incredibly, incredibly seriously. I have the esteemed privilege of serving as the director of the USC Wrigley Institute for Environment and Sustainability. You may know of us. If you don't, we are kind of USC's de facto place for research, engagement, and of course, education at the intersection of people and the environment. Sustainability is infused across our campus, from operations through to other programs and departments within Dornsife, and of course across the entirety of the university and our many schools that are represented here. But what's unique about the Wrigley Institute is we are the one place on campus that does sustainability 24/7, 365. We eat, sleep, breathe, drink sustainability full time. We have a wonderful campus on Santa Catalina Island. We have upwards of almost 90 affiliated faculty. We have research programs spanning marine research, terrestrial research, economic research, anthropology, psychology. I could go on. We have a wonderful team that puts on incredible events. Amber Brown works very closely with us. She puts this event on, so you can sort of tell just from this how special our team is when it comes to engaging with academics, but also the non-academic community as well. So I'm really proud as the director of the Wrigley Institute to welcome you and to welcome Eduardo and Sandra to USC. I also want to take a quick second to introduce the other members of the Tyler Prize Executive Committee. They're the people that make the Tyler Prize possible. They select the laureates, but as you might imagine, there's more to it than that. There's an awful lot that happens behind the curtain that I'm learning myself, and it's a really incredible group. The chair, the outgoing chair, she's done this for 10 years. She's absolutely remarkable. We're going to miss her, is Julia Martin-Lefebvre. We have Chris Boone, the Dean of the Price School. Hold your applause till the end. Otherwise, this is going to take 17 minutes. Chris Boone is the Dean of our USC Price School. Rashid Sumaila from the University of British Columbia. Rosina Beerbaum, my former colleague at the University of Michigan. Stephanie Hampton, Nicole Dublier, Margaret Kately Carlson, Jonathan Patz, Jim Watson, and then, of course, Julia Carabias, who I will introduce more deeply in a moment. We're also joined on the live stream by two of our advisors, Alan Kovich and Judith McDowell. It's this group of people working with our friends at Reagency and, of course, with the support of the university and clearly Amber Brown that makes this possible. So now, thank you to all of you for everything you do. So, to get the program officially underway, I'd like to introduce Julia Carabias. She is a distinguished Mexican biologist, ecologist, and perhaps most importantly, environmentalist. She earned her bachelor's and her master's degrees in biology from the National Autonomous University of Mexico, and she has been a faculty member there since, do you want me to say the year? Am I reading this right? 1977. Oh my goodness. You don't look it. You don't look it. Her research focuses on ecology with an emphasis on conservation management and restoration of tropical ecosystems. In 1994, she was appointed as Mexico's Secretary of the Environment, Natural Resources, and Fisheries, and that's a position she held until 2000. During her tenure, she played a pivotal role in expanding Mexico's protected natural areas and integrating environmental considerations into national development policies. She received numerous accolades, as you might expect, for her contributions to environmental conservation, including the J. Paul Getty Award for Conservation Leadership in 2000, the International Cosmos Prize in 2004, and this is incredible, the United Nations Champions of the Earth Award in 2005. In 2017, she was honored with Mexico's Belisario Dominguez Medal of Honor. She is a powerhouse. It's obvious. She is a powerhouse, and she continues to be a powerhouse as an influential figure in environmental science and policy, clearly in Mexico, but also internationally. Julia, the show is yours.
So hello, everybody, and thank you, Joe, very much for your presentation and your words. It's an honor for me to moderate this conversation. I would like to thank my colleagues of the Executive Committee of Tyler Prize for their trust, and especially to the chair, Julia Marton-Lefebvre. For more than 50 years, science has been warning us about the risk of ignoring growing environmental problems. And those warnings were largely dismissed. Now, what once were a problem have become an emergency. Today, the Tyler Prize is recognizing two extraordinary scientists that have been raising their voices for many decades about this emergency, but also bringing solutions to the table. For the first time, the Tyler Prize is recognizing these two Latin American, South American scientists, and for the first time, a Latin American woman, which is very proud for all of the women in the world. So, Sandra. Both scientists who have been strong advocates to interdisciplinary approaches, a perspective that for many years was undermined through what we call the hard science, and it was taken interdisciplinary like a less academic value. However, our laureates have helped bring to light the fundamental dependence of human beings on biodiversity, because after all, we are only one more species in this planet. We know that the environmental crisis is deeply linked with policies, economic and social crises driven by development models that justify degradation in the name of the cost of progress. This crisis won't be solved without a real shift in direction in new development and governance paradigms. To better understand our laureates' deep influence and reflection on these issues, we will first listen to them in two presentations, then followed by a discussion between us, and at the end, to open the floor to the rest of the audience. So let me first introduce our laureate, Sandra Díaz. She is a world-renowned ecologist from Argentina. She's a professor of the National University of Córdoba, a senior researcher of CONICET, and a Martin School Fellowship at Oxford. Her research shows how biodiversity supports ecosystems and how nature loss affect people. By highlighting how societies value and depend on nature, she has bridged science, policy, and justice. Thank you, Sandra, and please join us to hear your presentation.
Good morning, everyone. I feel most honored to be here today. I want to express my warmest gratitude to the Tyler Foundation as a whole, to the very distinguished members of the Executive Committee, to the former Tyler laureates that are here with us today, and to the University of Southern California, and very especially to the student ambassadors. I also want to thank all those colleagues with whom I share so many intellectual adventures during my career, and also my early teachers and family who always supported me, despite the fact that my early inclination for science wasn't particularly mainstream at the time I was growing up, in the place I was growing up and being a little girl. In this presentation, I am not going to talk about the human destruction of nature. We analyze it extensively in the IPBES Global Assessment on Biodiversity and what it means to people. This was a massive report, which I had the privilege to co-chair together with my most eminent colleague, Eduardo Brondízio, Joseph Setele, and with the heroic support of Hien Go and her team. When the report was released, we managed to grab quite a few important international headlines. So you probably heard about this very worrying decline in nature. So for today's presentation, I would like to focus on something related but different, which is how entangled we all are with the fabric of life on Earth. Our perceptions of nature are strongly shaped by a paradigm of detachment and separation between people and nature. According to this narrative, nature is separate from us, is out there to serve us and for us to exploit and conquer, with the exception perhaps of a few pockets there and here that we keep under some sort of bell jar. But there is overwhelming scientific evidence against this narrative. To start with, we are linked to other life on Earth through common ancestry. All life on Earth is part of the same evolutionary tree or evolutionary web. So we share many genes, many physiological pathways, many pathogens with other organisms. Second, we are linked to other organisms through ecological interactions. We are exchanging materials with them all the time. And in addition, through our lifestyle choices, we are connected to human and non-human life in other places, sometimes very remote places. For example, Manfred Lenzen and his colleagues have shown that as many as 30% of all the global threats to animals related to consumption don't originate in the same country where the animals live. And to make the example much more concrete, if we take the case of the US, for example, consumption in the US threatens more than 4,000 species domestically. And in addition to that, almost 2,000 species in other countries. In other words, our lifestyle choices, even if we don't think of nature at all, have very important consequences for human and non-human life in other places. And today, there is hardly any portion of the biosphere that doesn't bear the stamp of humans. This is a global map of wilderness areas, areas with minimum human influence in dark green and yellow. These areas represent a small proportion of the surface of the planet. And even these remote areas bear the stamp of climate change, global atmospheric pollution, and global pathogens. And the vast majority of them, at least the ones on land, have been under the management of indigenous peoples for hundreds to thousands of years, as Eduardo probably tell us more about. So today, we can say that nature on Earth is indeed human nature. So for better or worse, we are inextricably entangled with other life on Earth, ecologically, evolutionarily, sociable. And that's why when we talk about biodiversity, nature, the biosphere, some of us like to refer to it as the fabric of life on Earth, a living fabric, a rich living tapestry in which humans are just some threads interwoven with many, many other threads. And this is not just a poetic expression. It has very concrete practical connotations. However, it hasn't really seeped into social narratives, and it's largely invisible to most of our institutions and policies. Now, if we accept that we are indeed deeply entangled with other life, what would be the implications for our scientific research? How do we approach this complexity? We start with whatever makes up the bulk of the living fabric. And most of the stuff of the living fabric is plants. Plants are not only the main entry point of energy into the planet, they also represent more than 80% of the living mass. Now, if one wants to study not just one plant species, but all plants on the planet, one immediately runs into a problem. The trouble with gorgeous biodiversity is that it's so overwhelmingly diverse. So treating it as just number of species is very unsatisfactory because they are all slightly different. But on the other hand, there are about 400,000 plant species known to science, far too many to treat each of them as a special case. So what we did was to come up with the notion of functional biodiversity. Functional biodiversity means approaching biodiversity not just as number of species, but focusing on their ecological roles, on their strengths and vulnerabilities in the face of an environment, about what they do to other organisms and to ecosystems, and what are their lifestyles. And we wanted to unveil very general, simple patterns underpinning all this Baroque complexity. We wanted to unveil general plant lifestyles. And as proxies for these lifestyles, we chose plant functional traits. That is, characteristics of the leaves, the seeds, the stems, the plant as a whole, that are very simple, but at the same time are absolutely fundamental for any plant on Earth. And we gather information of these characteristics for more than 40,000 plant species from all over the world. Now, I'm sure you are all familiar with the 3 dimensions of geographical space: latitude, longitude, and elevation above sea level. And with these 3 dimensions, you can construct any geographical space, like this map. What we did was to construct a functional space. Instead of using 3 coordinates, we use 6 dimensions, 1 per each of these fundamental plant functional traits. And this is the functional space we unveiled. This is a very broad brush panorama of the different lifestyles of plants on the planet. And we call this broad picture the global spectrum of plant form and function. In this functional map, if you want, instead of having 2 coordinates, latitude and longitude, we have 2 main functional coordinates. One is this one. It's about size. It goes from very small plants with tiny leaves and tiny seeds, like duckweed, all the way to very tall plants with large seeds and large leaves, like the Brazil nut. And the second major functional coordinate is this one. Is all about leaf economics and pace of life. And it goes from plants with very slow growing and long-lived leaves, robust, tough, conservative leaves, such as junipers or holly, all the way to plants with very tender, flimsy, nitrogen-rich leaves that are displayed very quickly and live very short, like basil. And here, I just depicted a number of well-known species so you can have a better idea of where is whom in this functional space. Indeed, plant life on Earth, in all its exquisite variety, follows very simple patterns, very simple lifestyles, which allows us to simplify it in this very stylized functional space. We found this quite a powerful way to understand, to reduce the complexity of the plant component of the living fabric. And that could probably have been enough if we were looking at the fabric from outside. But as we've been discussing, we are part of the fabric, we're inside. And indeed, we have been inextricably bound to plants since our very origins. Plants make up most of our food. They are the basis of our economies. They distribute water around the planet. They affect and drive the climate. They underpin most of aspects of our health. and they provide the inspiration for our discoveries and for the stories and images that make up our individual and collective identities. Indeed, plants make us who we are. And we have a technical term to refer to that deep dependence. We call it nature's contributions to people. Nature's contributions to people are all the contributions, both positive and negative, of nature or portions of nature to the quality of life of humans as individuals, as societies, or as humanity as a whole. Or if you want an even simpler definition, nature's contributions to people are all the good and bad things nature does for us, with us, and to us. Now, this notion was born out of a process in the context of IBES, a long, very pluralistic, transdisciplinary process with the participation of natural sciences, social sciences, people from the humanities, and a whole bunch of other social actors, including indigenous peoples, policymakers, grassroots leaders, and many others. It was quite an intellectual adventure. Some of you remember probably. And the idea was to capture with this concept all the things that different manifestations of nature, animals, plants, ecosystems, any bit of nature represented for each of these very different social actors, described in their own terms. So we found this concept, which we feel it was representative and legitimate to all parties involved. Now, you may think that this global spectrum of plant form and function is very abstract. I'm sure that nobody's going to take to the streets to fight for it. But it has a lot of practical implications for people's lives. Actually, this space allows us to link plant lifestyles with people's lifestyles. For thousands of years, we have been using different regions of this functional space, different plant lifestyles for different purposes. We have been focusing in all our attention and care in some regions of this functional spectrum and ignoring other regions, other lifestyles. For example, most of the plants that we have been using for thousands of years as food, to have fun, and to kill each other, all are confined in that particular area of the spectrum in the red circle. And at the same time, we have been posing threats deliberately or as collateral damage on other plant lifestyles, on other regions of the functional spectrum. And at the same time, plants with different lifestyles have very different positive and negative contributions to different people. There's hardly any plant which is universally positive or negative, important or unimportant for everybody on Earth. There's no such a thing. Different social actors attribute very different values to different lifestyles. And the same plant that is the anchor of livelihoods and identities for some is invisible or is the enemy to other social actors. And all this is ecologically fascinating, but it goes well beyond the reach of fundamental ecology. So for some years now, we have been teaming up with colleagues from the social scientists and with other social actors in trying to capture as completely as possible the positive and negative contributions of these different plant lifestyles for different people. And we are focusing especially in the whole range of values that different people attach to these different plant lifestyles. Instrumental values for sure, including monetary values, but that's not all. There's a whole range of other values, including deep relational values. And this range of values is critically important when it comes to the decisions people make about nature every day. So, a new narrative about nature and us that sees us as not as starkly different, not as starkly separate, but as deeply entangled with the rest of life on Earth, demands interdisciplinary work and transdisciplinary work. And talking about interdiscipline with the social sciences, it's time now to give the floor to my most esteemed colleague, Eduardo Brondízio. Thank you.
Sandra, thank you very much for this inspiring presentation. And now let me introduce Eduardo Brondízio from Brazil. He's a professor of Indiana University, an external professor of the University of Campinas in Brazil. His academic background began in agronomy and spatial information systems, but his trajectory waved these fields with economic and environmental anthropology to address questions of human-environmental interactions for the local to the global scale. He has been working for 35 years with the Amazonian communities, and he coordinates a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve project across 4 Amazonian countries involving 400 indigenous communities. His work has highlighted the importance of indigenous and local knowledge in addressing environmental crises. And I must add that, as already Sandra mentioned, that both, together with Joseph Settil, co-chair the Global Environmental Biodiversity and Ecosystem Service of IPES that has been an applied reference for all of us that study and work on these issues. So welcome, Eduardo, to the floor.
Good afternoon, I guess. Yeah. What a beautiful presentation, Sandra. Thank you so much. And what a big shoes to follow, I guess. I am so honored to be here, to follow the steps of previous laureates. Thank you for the committee. I appreciate the work that the Tyler Prize does for everybody, because it's a work that is shedding light on the contributions of science. And we very much need that, particularly at this moment. And we've been doing that for over 50 years. And we appreciate the opportunity to be part of that journey. Thank you to the committee. Thank you to the ambassadors. Thank you to USC for welcoming us. And I want to have a special thank you to my family who's here. And also to many of the people who inspired me, who are here, who are my mentors, who are my inspirations, and really helped me to look through the world through Amazonian eyes. I'm going to start, by chronicle another side of Sandra's presentation. And that's what we did together in the Global Assessment Report, which is a report that, beyond understanding the state of biodiversity and the state of ecosystems, was a chronicle of our history of development, and a way for us to think about our trajectory of development, particularly during the past 50 years. This has been the time when, before any other time, our change has been so accelerated and so large that we have impacted what Sandra just presented us, the very fabric of life that we depended on. We have completely reshaped the world, and here I'm talking about the destruction of nature too. We have completely reshaped the terrestrial planet that we have, the wetlands, the marine environment, in a way that we're now kind of coming to confront the consequence. Sandra mentioned about the nature's contributions to people that we all depend on. During the past 50 years, we have undermined and is under decline 14 of 18 contributions that we have been able to document in the Global Assessment Report. We have put up to 1 million species in endangerment during this century. And all this process has not been distributed equally. There's a second paradigm, a second assumption that is behind what Sandra was telling us about the separation between us and nature. That second assumption is an assumption that indigenous peoples and smallholder food producers would inevitably disappear. They would become part of the urbanized world. These two assumptions are the bottom line of the development paradigm that we are living today. And it's deeply ingrained in our mindsets, the fundamental ideas behind these two assumptions. On my side, what I want to also tell the story is that beyond unraveling the fabric of life, the process of development that we've been experiencing have equally unraveled the social fabric of life, particularly of those who are at the margins of this view of development, right? That see it linearly and that has very deep roots in the way we think about societal change. Indifferent consciously and unconsciously, we still reproduce ideas of social evolutionism of the 19th century that saw people going through a progression that would eventually merge it to a Western society, to urban societies. We didn't see space for other ways of living and for the complementarity of many ways of working and interacting with nature as part of this linear trajectory. The 20th century social evolution version of that is modernization theory that basically reproduced that process in which we see very little space for those indigenous peoples, for rural communities, in the case of small food producers that we have been working with for so long time. So my point, part of my point here today is that today we live in an irony, a mismatch between what we think about society and what actually is there, and the presence of those who have stayed at the margin of society. So indigenous peoples and local communities is a broad term that I'm using. Most of the work when I talk about local communities has to do with small rural communities, and in my case, close to my heart, smallholder food producers. They are a major part of the global social fabric, and yet they're invisible. They are considered anachronic, as I was just saying, irrelevant, backwards, and yet they are major players in the global food system. Today, we recognize in the Global Assessment Report, I think contribute importantly to that all the international agreements that we are trying to pursue together depend crucially on indigenous peoples and local communities. They are central for us to meet the climate change goals that we have, biodiversity goals, and many other related goals, such as relate to food production. So guess what? They haven't disappeared. They haven't merged in society. Many of them have resisted, creatively adapted, innovated in many ways, and are contributing governance systems that are helping to maintain the fabric of life that we have today. Sandra very well said already that some of the most pristine or conserved places on the planet are held and managed, particularly by indigenous peoples. So let me show you why this is important and what we have learned during the past 10 years or so with efforts from many people in an effort where the Global Assessment Report contribute to bring together communities that were working independently to give a more realistic picture of the role and place of indigenous people and local communities globally. This is a map that came together during the global assessment by a network of scientists that for the first time in 2018 were able to put together a global picture of indigenous land. The results, not surprising for many of us, but it became sort of quite a surprise in the sense of showing that today over a quarter of the terrestrial surface of the planet is managed, held in rights, and cared for by indigenous peoples. If you consider local communities, we're likely doubling that amount. Most of our conservation goals that we have achieved during the past 30, 40 years rest on the weight and shoulders of local communities and indigenous peoples. 40% of the global protected areas are managed by them. 42% of the areas in good ecological conditions are within those territories, and including some of the key biodiversity areas. The picture is that 500 million indigenous people and another billion some of local communities are a major player of the planet that we live today. Yet they're disconsidered. And what I want to go through in a second is to show why we have this mismatch between reality and their contributions and their recognition and invisibility in society. They're not small players as we hear every day. Small-scale fisheries, Rashid and Daniel are here, are laureates who have really highlight the challenges and the solutions for this. They are a major global employer, 110 million jobs, 40% of the world's catch. Half of those jobs are with women. And it's more than industrial fisheries, oil, gas production, shipping, and tourism together. Smallholder producers, just the tiny ones of 2 hectares or less, have 85% of the farms on the planet produce 35% of the global food supply. If you add the category of family farms, which is very broad, that goes to 75% of the food supply. Pastoralists everywhere in the globe represented a major part equally of managing grasslands and savannas and producing food everywhere. And indigenous species harvest, it supports over 1 billion people globally. So there's nothing invisible about it. It's the way we see it that makes it invisible. We have done a research just a year and a half ago looking at employment in food production, particularly by smallholders in 189 countries globally. What we documented in this paper here is what I think is one of the most significant transformation of society in the past 30 to 50 years. And yet, one that we don't even care about because it's inevitable. I received, by the way, 4 reviews on this paper that Nature published. They were all negative because they had the same message. We understand your purpose, but this is inevitable. So the mindset that we have about them is that mindset, of an anachronic, irrelevant, backward, people that are still surviving in spite of everything. We lost 200 million jobs in food production, mostly by smallholders and indigenous peoples, since 1990 only. If you multiply each of those jobs by a family, we're talking about a process affecting perhaps 1 billion people. We projected decline in employment in food production to 2030 to add another 120 million jobs lost during this decade. But this is a decade where 1.2 billion people are joining the job market, particularly in the regions where this process of unemployment is happening. Now, is this inevitable? Or is it a self-fulfilling promise that because they don't matter, because they don't make a difference, because they are anachronic, they don't need support, they don't need to be recognized, and therefore to flourish, right, as part of this process. The consequences are major, and that's why they are, back to our title, Sandra, they're interwoven in many aspects of society in a way that we consider invisible. Every job that we lost in food production by indigenous peoples and by rural smallholder producers have consequences in their own communities that are dismantled, services that are dismantled, have consequences for the landscapes that are result, for the agrobiodiversity, for the knowledge and for the management techniques that are there, have consequences for large regions in which that shape process of land aggregation and many other processes, and they are behind the kind of urbanization and some of the migration crises that we talk about today, but without thinking about those roots of those migration crises. They're interwoven with our future, as our title suggested. As an anthropologist, we are seeing this through the Amazonian eyes, and I'm referring here to Emilio's book that introduced it. Andrea, my wife, as being a long-term partner in research, myself, and many others, to study Amazonians through Amazonian eyes, which was the title of the book through which we. So I want to give a look into the same problem through an Amazonian eyes. And Amazonia has been sort of a microcosm, if you can call Amazonia a microcosm, of this global transformation. Perhaps it's the region where we have seen the fastest and most accelerated transformation in the planet, as we documented here in our slideshow. Now, behind the transformation, you have lots of other things happen that are also invisible to the eyes of the outside. And I want to tell the story, a story that is very local and very dear to me. But I want to tell this story in a way that it may help us to understand how invisibility is constructed. What are the processes behind, the kinds of narratives that we create that do not recognize the actors that are behind so many, of the things that we depend on. And that's the story of acai fruit and the people who produce acai fruit. That story is part of that transformation. It starts with the urbanization of the Amazon in the 70s and 80s. For many of the colonies who arrived there, many of the native populations who arrived there, who have been squeezed out to urban areas in the region. That created a market for a preferred cultural regional food, acai. That market led riverine people in the Amazon to respond to that, to start to intensify, use their knowledge of forest, use their techniques of agroforestry to manage the floodplain forests, to create gardens that are intermixed with forest, to transform forests in very intensive production system regions. I call them forest farmers. Now, with that process, they have provided acai to urban centers, but they also have transformed large landscapes in the region. And how do people see that? So here's a quote, and the people with whom we work with, riverine Amazonians, they have a particular position in the social ladder of the region. And that's a position that reproduces the story that I was telling at the beginning, right? And position them as unable to respond to those markets, to engage in that transforming Amazonia, patient and resigned, unable to plan for the future, lacking hierarchical organization and engineering minds. As acai became a national and global commodity, many actors were coming and trying to find a position in an economy that was then billionaire. And you see here an example of how these new actors were positioned, the actual actors behind that transformation. They do not know agricultural techniques that increase acai production upon typical of the region. Before that, which means before the external companies arrive, the producer would only see the acai tree during harvest, would wait for the fruit to fall as passive actors. The reality is very different. So we construct images of what is productive land, who are the productive actors, that are based on ideas that are very ingrained in our mindset. So you can see the same landscape that I'm describing as here, where they are the passive actors. They're waiting for the fruit to fall, and that's native forest that is out there. Or you can see it differently. You can see them as forest farmers, as I've been arguing. And if you map the yellow part, these are intensive agroforestry production areas. So suddenly, and I'm short on time already, they become the most important producers in the region. So that's, invisibility is a trick of our minds and our eyes. That process has led to the expansion of this production system throughout the Amazon. It has gone from that small region where we start to work to today being produced in every municipality of the region. It has expanded to a global billionaire economy. If you turn the corner here, you're going to see an acai flag right there, which is here. And it has become the most important economy in the Amazon through the hands of those producers, the most important employer in the Amazon. But there's another side of that story that is connected to the beginning of our transformation story here. They've been also squeezed out and disregarded. These are the poorest urban areas, rural areas, and indigenous areas in the region. So migration, urban precarity, dependence on government assistance is also part of that reality. So there's this other arrow below, in which those conditions have led the region, to increase urbanization and transformation of the region. So as I try to close here within time, the Amazon can help us also to see the interwoven ties that we have globally. In the region today, it's a very different regions that we have in our imaginaries of a wide wilderness and isolated indigenous peoples. It's at the forefront of climate change, with some of extreme events of climate change. The territorial fragmentation of the Amazon is a reality that is shaping the region and its response to climate change. Organized crime has expanded throughout the Amazon, particularly in the past 5 years or so. Today, 1/3 of Amazonia municipalities host 19 organized crimes. And this has made illegal economies in the region one of the dominant economies in the region and one of the largest employers in the region. The Amazon is a mirror to many of the polycrises that we see globally. Here again, indigenous peoples are at the center of that. For 30 years, one of the largest and most important advances we have had was the recognition of territorial rights for indigenous people and for traditional communities, and the creation of a network of indigenous areas, sustainable use areas, and protected areas that now represent 45% of the region. This has been the most important component of the environmental governance that has prevented further deforestation, further fire, And they are at the forefront, of the biggest pressures that we have in the Amazon. I'm going to have to skip this, but the point here is that they are also at the very base of the regional bioeconomy, which we call the social bioeconomy. And this is the best help we have to turn the current trajectory of the region to a trajectory that is more inclusive and that will deal with the kinds of environmental problems that we have. The Amazon has already contributed, and indigenous people in their domestication of crops have already contributed to some of the biggest agricultural economy in the world. And initiatives from local communities and indigenous groups are everywhere. We've been documenting this throughout the Amazon, and this is just the tip of the iceberg of activities that are trying to confront these problems from the ground up. Non-timber activities, forest management, agriculture and agroforestry systems, water and fisheries management, and these are some of the most successful, yet invisible, behind the canopy of the tree where we don't see, but that are trying to confront these problems of the Amazon. So their contribution has been enormous, but they continue to face the same problems that smallholders and indigenous peoples face everywhere. Governance system that were able to advance in the past 50 years is now under threat, being undermined by 1,000 cuts, and challenge us to think about new ways of thinking about governance of very complex landscapes like the Amazon. To end, this is the big debate of the Amazon today. The Amazon is undergoing a potential tipping point to change forever. Now, the point is that to confront that, the best allies that we have, the best hope we have, the best knowledge of the region we have rests on the hands of indigenous peoples and local communities and the networks that they form. So we are intrinsically interwoven, to go back to our title, with them, not only on biodiversity conservation, but on climate, on food production, and urbanization. We are at a time now where we can revert this curve, right? Or we can continue in the trajectory that we know what's giving. So to end with our topic of interwoven between people and nature, the Amazon is part of a global system. It shows us that we are interwoven indeed. And the efforts that they are doing in the Amazon are important and contribute to the region, but they are not sufficient. If we don't deal with climate change at a global level, there's nothing that we can do on the ground that will revert the trajectory of the region that we have today. COP30 is coming in November to the Amazon, and this will be our chance, right, to rethink how we've been affecting the region and how we've been dealing with the problems that we have. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much for these stimulating presentations. I hope that everybody has been very much involved in those issues. And before going to take some questions from the audience, I would like to make a few reflections with you two. Sandra, you are you have a solid ecological foundation. You are a very well ecology recognized worldwide. But now you are a reference for a person that is linking science with public policy and are highlighting the contribution of nature for human well-being. That is a change, and I think that reflects very much. I'm older than you, but our generation. We started with science, basic science. We are much more now in this interdisciplinary vision. Tell us something to the young people. How was that change? How was that transformation in you to incorporate this social and economic vision to your work? And what are the obstacles that you find? Because these messages in this audience is very well taken, I hope, but not outside. We have very difficult situations to be heard outside. So can you tell us something about your experience, please?
Yeah, thank you. I will tell you a little bit about the transition, and then if there is time, I can tell why I think are the practical obstacles. My transition happened very gradually. I've always been interested in very general frameworks, much better in trying to find links between disparate fields than going into the details of any particular field. That's always been my intellectual preference, even if it wasn't particularly applied. But it was, you may remember, for a long time, it was very difficult to do that kind of science because the funding agencies wouldn't give you money for that, because there was nowhere to publish the papers. So it was difficult, and we did it on the side on our free time. Until I think in the early 2000s, governments and agencies started realizing the magnitude of the challenges, the complexity of the challenges, so started suddenly demanding that we would put together interdisciplinary projects. And in our case, we were ready. So we jumped at the opportunity, started doing it. And that was much fun. But I guess a turning point in terms of interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity for me was when I engaged in IBES. And I was suddenly just starting, blessed with the little job of spearheading the conceptual framework of IBES, which had to be a convergence of social sciences, the humanities, natural sciences, and other knowledge systems. So that was the little job. And I had no idea when I say yes. But I said yes, and I had to do my best. And that was an incredibly complex process, politically and epistemologically. But in the end, we managed to get something that I don't think it made anybody terribly happy, but everybody could live with it. And I think that was our best achievement, I would say. Finding something everyone can live with, and understanding that if other social actors and other disciplines don't engage with you, maybe it's not because they don't get it, maybe because you are not answering questions that are meaningful to them, and maybe you are using categories that they don't understand. So finding common intellectual meeting points to me is the key in these times.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Sandra. And Eduardo, I would like to know a little more about your experience. We know that valuing biodiversity is a very complex matter, but this is necessary. Beyond metrics and methodologies, the intrinsic value of nature is at the core of indigenous worldwide. And some countries, such as New Zealand and Ecuador, have already begun to recognize this right of nature in the constitutions. What advantages and challenges you see to operationalize this topic?
Thank you, Julia, for this question. I think this question is also closely connected to the history of this prize. So valuation of nature, what I tend to say, actually wrote a paper about it many years ago, say it's a balancing act. And why it's a balancing act? You know, we are talking here about invisibility and the invisibility of nature to our lives. And also talking about the invisibility also of indigenous peoples and local communities, you know, to our lives. So when you look back, you know, to the history of valuing nature, you go back to the early 1980s, right? When scientists from here, one of the laureates here, Hal Mooney, Paul Ehrlich, and his wife, and others, were at the very beginning of conceived this idea of environmental services. as an idea of bringing visibility, right, to the invisibility that we're talking about. I can think at least of two other laureates who have been here because of their work on that, Gretchen Daly, Pavan Suklev, and probably others. So this is an effort that has been coming, for 40 years. Over time, that gained a lot of attention in terms of the monetary value. So during the 1990s, you see a lot of efforts to put a dollar value on nature, right? But it also opened a space for a much broader conversation about values, right? And as you said, for us to start considering intrinsic value as part of this process. So why it's a balancing act? Because on the one hand, if you think about valuation, and particularly monetary valuation, you're talking about projecting a cultural system, very particular cultural systems, right? And projecting that on nature, project that on how we see nature, right? And how we act upon nature. But on the other hand, the other part of this balancing value is, what I was saying, it opened a much bigger conversation about values, about all the nature's contributions that we depend on. Not only the instrumental values that we have, the things that we can appropriate and derive, and not also the intrinsic value, but also the relational values, the value that nature has for our social relations. So it's opened up a sphere that we need to navigate with care. Commodifying nature only on the base of money, it's going to project, the ideas and the values that some people hold, over the values that do not have, that same currency. But I want to sort of end with another aspect that I think this conversation has contributed significantly, which has to do with the contributions of indigenous peoples and local communities. So in the early 1990s, ecologists and economic botanists, start to say, how much does a hectare of tropical forest really worth, right? And we start to see tropical forests also with different eyes. But this has also been very important for things like I showed here, the Açaí agroforestry system, the Arapaima community-based management of fisheries, and many other aspects where through ideas of values, we have been able to show more clearly the actual contributions that people do, the actual value of agrobiodiversity, the actual value of agroforestry knowledge, and managing large landscapes, right? We still have a long way to go. We work with communities that are protecting, monitoring, put their lives on the line against illegal economies to protect large areas, large protected areas, and they're doing that out of their own pockets too. So we need to continue to expand this conversation. We need to navigate it carefully, right? But it is an important instrument to to open up a discussion about the values of natures and our dependence on natures everywhere.
Thank you, Eduardo. Sandra, coming back to with you now, over the last 3 decades, we have achieved some results of integrating interdisciplinary to several of the multilateral agreements. One of them is the most obvious, is the Agenda 2030, the global assessment that you coordinated. Also this blueprint of make peace with nature. And there is some other, obviously, that we can go on and on. However, translating this to the national public policies into a transversal structure at the global level and at the national level is being very, very difficult. For example, the connections between climate change and biodiversity conventions is very weak still, and linking those conventions with the other social and economic fora is nearly non-existent. Some countries are doing better in environmental policies, but I don't see many countries that are doing this integration with the economy and with the social aspect to plan the development of a country. How can you comment some things about how decision makers have to compulsory incorporate the best possible science, because if the science is already there and is saying what is going to happen if you don't do this and this, then it has to be forbidden to do that to a functionary in governments, no?
Thank you. I think there are two major reasons for this complete disconnect in the findings of science and practice. On the one hand, there is this paradigm of separation I was talking, that when we talk about the fabric of life and we are all connected and everything, everybody knows, but it's not yet embedded in legislation, in economy, in our regulations as a society. It is embedded in environmental policy. But beyond environmental policy, other areas of the works of society, general legislation, energy regulation, regulation of transport, industry, agriculture, general education, city planning, all of the economy of a society, it's like they don't see there is life around us. They, in practice, assume that other life is either not there or is a nuisance that has to be pushed away as much as we can. So to me, that's a big part of the problem. To me, part of the real solution would be start incorporating the care of nature, safeguards about nature, attention to other living organisms in the very fabric of society, in, as I said, transport legislation, education, city planning, all the things that are not traditionally associated with the environment, things that happen close to us, has to have safeguards and the care of nature. To me, that's one point. Examples, I don't want to be too long, but for example, when I was showing that the biodiversity footprint of countries goes well beyond their national boundaries, one way countries could start in making biodiversity more visible and integrating a little bit more with the fabric of life could be, instead of reporting just their domestic footprint on biodiversity, as they do now in, for example, for the Convention on Biological Diversity, maybe they could start reporting the global footprint. Or businesses, for example, instead of just reporting how many walls of their headquarters they cover with greenery or how many dollars they donate to a tiger charity, they could start looking at all the steps of their value chain and look at the impact on biodiversity of each of these steps and tell how are they working to fix it, right? So those are all examples of how to make nature more connected and more visible in the workings of society rather than just environmental policy. Or for example, having nature safeguards in cities, in agricultural landscapes, in roads. That's one part of the problem. The other part of the problem why this doesn't happen, doesn't go into practice, is because all institutions, from international, intergovernmental to municipalities, work in silos. So even if we, all decided these measures I was proposing are great, and indeed they are feasible and they are even not very expensive, it's very difficult to make them happen because different structures in governments don't talk to each other. Different ministers in countries don't work with each other. Different international conventions don't work together. We have a climate convention, we have a biodiversity convention, and we have a separate desertification convention. And there's a lot of institutional inertia, a lot of institutional rigidity and territoriality that is getting in the way.
Thank you, Sandra. Unfortunately, time is running out very quickly, but I still want to make a question for you, Eduardo. We know that history is not linear. It's full of ups and downs and progress and setbacks. We are living in a time now that is profound changes and uncertainty, and that is causing a lot of anxiety. In the brief story of environmental policies, we have momentums very high, such as Rio Summit in '92, or of collapse as Rio plus 10 after 9/11. And now the rise of climate denialism. We have seen, for example, a few years ago in Brazil, the environmental policy was severely undermined, even to the point that it was the indigenous people that was blamed because of fires in 2020. And we are seeing now in Argentina also going back to the environmental policy. And what to say in this country that we're just in a few years at the beginning of January, we have witnessed chilling setbacks, not only denying the environmental crisis, but also promoting policies that will worsen them, dismantling science and infrastructure capacity built over years. So what is, in your perspective, the role of science to stop regression? And what is the hope that we can face for such a profound uncertainty?
Difficult question, but an important one. And I'm glad you asked this question. And the way I would respond to it in a short time would be, to think about what is at stake. So if we look in the Amazon, and let's start with the Amazon, we have, as I showed here, in 30 years, kind of, a bold governance approach that has given territorial rights, it started sustainable initiatives that has led to the protection of 45% of the Brazilian Amazon and 50% of the basin. 6 years ago, this whole system started not only to be dismantled, but to be discredited. And the result is what I was showing there, that the Amazon today, is facing not only the problems of climate change, but is facing the growth of illegal economies that are dominating and undermining all that progress, both that we did on the environmental front and that we did on the social front. The entire system of environmental monitoring and enforcement in the Amazon was dismantled, and it hasn't been put back together. I work in areas where, an area the size of Germany, Spain, France, and maybe Portugal together have not a single environmental protection base in place nowadays, but they used to have. You have a police, environmental police in the capital of Manaus, responsible without equipment, many of times, for monitoring and enforcing, economies that transcend the size of Western Europe. So what is at stake with those kinds of policies? They have long-term consequence, right? They're underlying the kinds of social problems that we have today. But let me get the other aspect of what is at stake here. When we look back, of advances in environmental and social issues here, we need to go back to the civil rights movement. A good part of the civil rights movement in the 60s and 70s were about environmental issues. They were about sanitation. They're about toxic exposure. They're about pesticide exposures, right, that disproportionately affect African American communities, migrant communities, and indigenous communities here. In few days, we'll be celebrating 55 years of Earth Day in this country. What is at stake? We need to look back, and the younger generation needs to look back how much we benefit of those efforts today. The Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, Occupational Health Act, Endangered Species Act, the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency, they led to an improvement in environmental conditions that we can't see anywhere in the world. Today, the waters of these countries are much safer for you to swim. It wouldn't be that 50 years ago. This place here 50 years ago would be one of the most polluted places on the planet. So we need to look back and see how much we have accomplished, right? And how much is at stake today. We also need to look back to see hope. And that's what I think is really key, for this younger generation to consider. When sustainable development ideas were put forth in the 1980s, is to secure the present, right? And safeguard the future generations. Guess what? You are the future generations of that past. And you are experiencing a much better environment and a much more fair environment because of environmental justices that were put in place through fights from 70s to the 80s to the 1990s when it became official here, right? That shows that even the most complex problems that we have today, we also had in the past. And we're able, to do and to act collectively to be able to address that. So I think, what is at stake is many progress that we have made, but also a sense of hope, and a sense of hope that we can confront these problems today. And I hope that's, the important things for the younger generation that is here. You can change that, right? Thank you.
Thank you, Eduardo. So now let's listen to some of our young people, perhaps, and if our ambassadors help us, Ariane and Gareth, can you help us to bring 3 questions from the public, please? Thank you, Gareth.
Please stand up.
How do you both think about the recent de-extinction? Like, I know it's not exactly a dire wolf, it's a gray wolf with edited genes, but what do you think would be the consequences of doing stuff like that and eventually releasing them into the wild when they're not? Like, for example, the white rhinos recently went extinct. If they were able to bring back a kind of mutated white rhino, what do you think the consequences would be of releasing that into the native environment?
Thank you. Can we get another question, please? Let's bring the 3 together. Somebody else?
I guess I have a question.
Yes, please.
So as you may know, there's a growing divide between both people and nature, and this often reflects the political systems. I recently attended an Australian talk on the upcoming election and the importance of food security that they want to prioritize. So in that context, how can we ensure that marginalized communities, especially Indigenous peoples who already have their own systems of land stewardship and governance, are meaningfully included in and represented in biodiversity policies? And what research methods do you use to genuinely engage with these communities in a respectful and effective way?
Thank you. A third one, and last one. Somebody else?
If no one else has one, I've got one. I'm curious about how we can take these learnings from Indigenous peoples and local communities into urban spaces and find ways of applying that knowledge in those urban contexts and still being able to make a difference.
Thank you. We have very little minutes, very few minutes. Sandra, can you answer the first one, perhaps the first and the second and the third you, Eduardo? Thank you.
Okay, I think that the extinction issue is a good example of how communication strategies make some issues very visible and some other issues very invisible. I mean, it's technically fascinating. We can debate the whole day whether we really need that or not, and what part of it is just pure commercial and what part of it could be used as a concept, as a proof of concept or something useful maybe in the future, right? But what the reality is that this is a tiny thing compared to the kind of challenges involving nature and people we have today. Some of them we showed today, but there are many, many others. They are huge, extremely complex challenges. However, everybody's talking about the de-extinction. The whole planet has been talking about the de-extinction in the past few days because there is, I wouldn't say manipulation, but it's as a handling of what information is important and what information needs to take to people and what information is basically hidden. I think people need to know much more about the state of the planet and what to do about it than what happens with the dire wolf, right? For example, what you were saying, you know? Yes, look at the examples, look at all the historic civil movements and learn from them and try to do something for the extremely dire, you know, talking about the dire wolf, the situation is really dire and we are not doing enough about it. And we are not being told enough about it. Thank you, Sandra. Sorry.
Well, thank you for these questions. So in terms of involving indigenous people and local communities, both in general in food security, but also, you know, relate to urban issues, I think that, you know, the simple answer is meaningfully engaging them, right? And being them part of the discussion and table, and so, which hasn't been the history, right, of policies or ideas that are usually imposed on them instead of engaging from the beginning and from the ground up. The other aspect, and that's something I didn't have a chance to talk about the Amazon, but it's something I've been working a lot, is, and the Amazon shows very much, urban areas are not separated from indigenous areas or from rural areas. We're all super interconnected. And the impacts that are, you know, being created outside in the urban areas is spread to indigenous areas. And vis-a-vis the impacts, you know, that are happening in indigenous areas are affecting urban areas equally, right? So we can think, for instance, about, you know, the spread of illegal mining and the crisis, I would say, of mercury pollution in the Amazon, in the Congo Basin, and many others. These are, you know, illegal minings that are eroding indigenous territories many places, but they will end up in the plate of people in urban areas the same way. So it's closely interconnected. But the other way to think about is the very gain popularity approach of nature-based solutions, right? Which is gaining track in urban areas to deal with urban issues through restoration, through conservation, through a number of techniques that I think we have a lot to learn, not only from indigenous peoples, but many rural communities and many social movements in urban areas that are trying also to face those issues. So, thank you.
So, time is over. I'm so sorry about it, but it's been great to have this conversation with you. Thank you very much indeed,
Julia.
and congratulations.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.